All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from our live stream with Tim Kirby. And let's begin with Commando Crossfire. And I heard, as it were, the notes of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse.
This is from Apocalypse, I believe. Well, let's hope things
Apocalypse
are not quite
and Johnny Cash. It's a Johnny Cash
Johnny
song
Cash.
as well.
Oh, really? Okay. Trust
Yes,
me
it
to
is.
get the literary one, but
All
not
right.
the musical one. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Sharon Quidney 2. Thank you for that super sticker. Milos Jack, thank you for that super sticker. Gustavo says Surovikin must be the Russian translation of Sherman. He's been placed there to make Ukraine howl.
Well, they called him General
Thank you for
Armageddon.
that, Richard.
He's also called Cannibal, apparently, by some of the Russians. So we'll see what he's really like.
Richard S. says, given recent events, what is the likelihood of Russia continuing with the SMO as they have been and actually taking Odessa versus reliable, CTO, etc.? Thanks. Much love from Florida.
Well, I've said all along what I believe. I cannot personally imagine that this conflict is going to end without the Russians taking Odessa. I think from a Russian point of view, and I'm not just talking about the Kremlin, I'm talking about Russian public opinion, they will feel very, very angry and very let down if this ends without Odessa being back under Russian control. Either because, Russia's been defeated in some way, or if there's some kind of diplomatic compromise, which still leaves Odessa in Ukraine, a lot of Russians will be very angry.
Maurice, thank you for that super sticker. Tyler NG says, happy 1010. Thank you, Tyler, for that. Not Banned Account says, will Russia launch nuclear first strikes on NATO?
No. I think they've repeated. This whole story about nuclear weapons and Russian use of nuclear weapons is an invented, artificial story. It's based upon twisting words that Putin especially has said, and giving them the opposite meaning to the one they have. The Russians are not planning to use nuclear weapons in this conflict.
Yeah. Not Banned Account says, how soon Ukraine counterattack major Russian cities?
Well, depends what you mean by Russian cities. If you mean Lysychansk, Kherson, well, they've been trying to do it already. Whether they'll succeed is another matter. If you mean Russian cities, if you mean cities within the pre-February Russian borders, I don't think we will ever get there.
Zionic 8, thank you for that super sticker. Ricardo Alfonso says, my first super chat, here's $5. Buy yourselves something nice. Thank you, Ricardo, for that. Miles Jack says, keep up the amazing work, gentlemen. You're my main news. So much fake propaganda, but you guys are the real deal. Regards from an Aussie Serb. Thank you for that, Miles Jack. Not Banned Account says, when will Putin and Russia pay for their war crimes?
Which particular war crimes are you thinking about? You're talking about the missile strikes. Can I just say those are not a war crime? I'm reasonably up to date with war crimes law, and I can tell you that they are not war crimes. That they don't come across as indiscriminate attacks. In fact, I've not even seen any serious attempt from any serious international lawyer claiming that they are war crimes. So be a bit more precise.
The 51 Project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the 51 Project says, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
It's from the Wizard of Oz, but I'm not sure what that refers to, if I can say.
Elka John says, the midterms are dictating the pace and nature of Russia's military actions the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, they're also possibly dictating Ukraine's actions. I just read a report just a few minutes ago, just before we did this program, that Biden, or at least the administration, is now putting enormous pressure on Ukraine to try some major attack on Kherson city against the wishes of the Ukrainian military, in order to try to capture Kherson city before the midterms, so that Biden can at least show something for all these weapons and money he's given to Ukraine. So yes, I think the midterms are very important. I think they have far less impact on what Russia does than on what Ukraine does, because I think the Russians have their own timetable and their own ideas. I don't think they're worried about the midterms, but Ukraine is, and of course the administration in Washington is, and they are both parties to this war.
Miles Jack says, so NATO condemns terrible and indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, but not in the Donbass, with over 8 years of terrible and indiscriminate acts by Ukraine, including with NATO weapons.
Absolutely, completely agree. Very good point, except, and this is an important difference, the attacks on the infrastructure in Ukraine are not indiscriminate. I mean, on the first 2 days, what was it, 14 people were killed, according to Ukrainian sources. These are not indiscriminate attacks.
Alan Shepard says, USA asking all its citizens to leave Ukraine.
Yeah, they've been doing that for months now. It's amazing that there are still people, American citizens, who refuse to go. And it tells you a lot. Both refuse to go from Ukraine and, of course, refuse to go from Russia. But, of course, when you talk about US citizens, they don't mean volunteer fighters, otherwise known as mercenaries, who are American citizens who are fighting in Ukraine. And, of course, they don't mean the massive advisors, technical people, spies, all that sort of thing, who are also there in Ukraine.
GSP says Zelensky in Lviv.
Possibly.
Perhaps. Christy G33 says, do you think Zelensky will try and strike more Russian infrastructure? It wouldn't surprise me if he did. It would be ill-advised, don't you think?
It'd be very ill-advised, but I think that's exactly what he's going to do, or it is what Ukraine is going to do, because that's the pattern. That's been the pattern of their behaviour now for several months. I mean, all the way back in March, they were already launching attacks on civilian facilities in Belgorod, helicopters flying over the borders and launching strafing attacks on Russian civilian centres. And the Russian government has responded with astonishing restraint in the face of all of this, earning a lot of criticism in Russia.
Dante's Inferno, thank you for that super sticker. Robin, thank you for that super chat. Keir Brown, like Putin said, rules-based order. Whose rules? Who made up the rules? Who got to even see the rules? This is just nonsense, made up by Western elites.
He's absolutely. I mean, I think those are quotes from Putin's speech, and yes, I think that's absolutely correct. We all know who's made the rules. The United States has. Or let's not talk about the United States. The neocons who hold the levers of power, the deep state, the globalists, those people have made those rules. And of course, you're absolutely right. Which rules? Which set of rules? Because the rules change every day, depending on what the policy is. So attacking Libya one day is fine, and doing all kinds of attacks on infrastructure there is fine, but it's not fine when it's done by Russia. The rules change depending on the circumstances, depending on the interests of the people who claim the right to make the rules.
Alexander from Sanjeva, one of two. Alexander, I am so glad you put the allegations against General Sergei Surovikin in perspective. In my 18 years of experience working in medicine, I have come to understand that people who are not flawed are very average. Part 2 of 2 in their work output. People who are exceptional are deeply flawed. This was true in the past as well as whether it's Einstein, Rommel, or Kennedy.
You're referring to a video which I made in which I discussed some of the allegations which have been made against General Surovikin. One of them, by the way, it seems was untrue, that he was engaged in arms trafficking. Apparently, he gave as a gift a pistol to a friend of his, and that friend of his then went on to sell it without, of course, telling Surovikin, and that led to allegations of arms trafficking. That clearly suggests to me that somebody was trying to use that incident as part of some kind of power play against Surovikin. Anyway, though Surovikin was judged guilty by a tribunal, it was quashed quite properly on appeal. But everything about Surovikin suggests he is a strong personality. He does obviously elicit strong opinions. And he's exactly the sort of person you say, Sanjeeva. No doubt, he's a flawed and difficult man, but then somebody with ability, somebody with drive, somebody who has the capacity to achieve, almost by definition. They are going to be all those things. We are in wholehearted agreement on this.
Alan Shepard says Zelensky hiding in the bunker crying, no tough now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan, for that. Kathy Hetson says removing the Ukraine proxy will remove the curtain obscuring the real multipolar framework underfoot, uncoupling the US dollar.
Yeah, I agree with that too, actually. I think that's where we're heading that way fast now.
Sundashan says, I think today's missiles strikes are just a trailer.
Yes, I agree with that also.
Danielle says, thank you for providing us a daily dose of sane commentary.
Oh, our pleasure.
Not a bad account says, how badly would a Trump regime undermine Ukraine?
Well, Trump has talked about the need for peace in Ukraine. He's fairly straightforwardly said that he's against the war. He's not always been consistent in all of the things he said. But to be honest, I think if he became president again, he would work to bring the war to an end. He cares about the United States. He cares about American workers. He cares about inflation. He cares about the US economy. He cares about all of these important things. He does not care about Ukraine. And that's the fundamental difference. And that's why I think he would look to find a solution to the war.
Sanjeva says, Alexander, the initial phase of the SMO is a bit similar to the initial phase of the Union campaign in the Civil War, isn't it? Generals being a bit hesitant to advance and the political leadership being a bit frustrated.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think that the more I follow this war, this current war, the more similar it looks in so many ways, so many different ways, to that war that was fought in the United States by the United States against the southern states in the 1860s. It's the only war I've ever studied, by the way, because it was part of my university degree, my history degree. But I think you're absolutely correct. The parallels are mounting. They're adding up all the time.
Def Leafy says, is Ukraine forcing Belarus into the conflict with their current behavior?
Yes, well, Belarus complains so, and it certainly looks like it.
John Danugat says, I am again able financially to donate after my dear wife, Margaret, passed on of cancer on September 12th. Margie, love.
We are very sorry to hear that. Our great condolences, and thank you for your support, but, you know, our prayers are with you.
Thank you, John, for the support, and God bless. Ricardo says the situation with returning the Azov fighters is similar to the Nadia Savchenko affair. That didn't work out too well for the Ukrainians. No,
it didn't, and that's a valid point. I think these people are different, actually. I think that they're a rather more corrupted and hardened criminals than she ever was. I mean, she was a deluded idealist, I think. They are not. I mean, I think they know exactly what they're about. It's perhaps important to remember about them that they are in Turkey. They're interned in Turkey. They have not, so far, gone back to Ukraine.
Passion Bohemian says, it's always a great pleasure to see and hear your analysis in politics and the truth about what is really going on. Wonderful job, gents.
Thank you very much.
G33K says, we're seeing the same price increases in America.
Inflation is pretty much the same everywhere.
Keir Brown says, we all know Putin was right. The globalists, neo-colonialists are trying to collapse the economies so they control the world.
Yeah. It's interesting that a world leader now says that.
Yep. Just arrest Panama. Thank you for that super chat. Commander Crossfire says, would it be better politically, geopolitically, security to annex Ukraine less the Western provinces, or installing a new friendly government that can exercise sovereignty over the whole territory?
I am increasingly of the view that people in Russia are turning against the idea of a puppet government in Kiev. I think they're coming round to the view that that will be extremely difficult to control, and such a government would be constantly the target of Western attempts at destabilization. Now, what further plans the Russians have, I am not sure. And whether the Russians have decided to move further west into the western regions of Ukraine, I'm not sure about that either. But I think that the puppet government idea was one which some people in Moscow might have entertained, but I think they've largely given up on it.
Keir Brown says, we understand this inherently in the constant militant war-like foreign policy that no one in the West asked for the elites dictating the war are losing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes.
Alex Glantz, thank you for that super sticker. Pro-Russian says, so God created man in his own image. Surovikin must be the spitting image of God. The Ukrainians and the West have angered him.
Well, he does look rather formidable. I'm not sure he looks like God, but he certainly looks pretty formidable.
Mr. Wonderful says, energy abundance and cost is the key. Russian industry will thrive, while in the West it is being strangled.
You know something? The Economist agrees with you. It's quite astonishing, but the first time I've ever seen them admit that the Russian economy is in a better shape than the Western.
Yeah. SSSS says, fight against those who fight against you in the way of God, but do not transgress, for God does not love transgressors. I think Russia was following this.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you for that. Okay. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Commander Crossfire says, Peter loved the West, so the West called him great. Catherine loved Russia, and Russia called her great. Mother of all Russia. Russia needs to learn to love itself.
Yeah, true enough.
Thank you for that. Commander Crossfire. Penthesilius says, Canada, if the world was to go back 8 years and pay attention, they would see who is the aggressor and who is the defender.
I completely agree with you, but that's why any discussion of the past in Ukraine is pretty much forbidden. There's lots of things about Ukraine and the war there that people don't want you to know about in the West.
Jennifer Chang says, don't worry, US, UK movies, TV shows are getting very boring. Supermarkets, affordable housing, healthcare, higher education are the keys. Social networking are dead. Russia has a great literature.
I actually, on balance, agree with this. I'm slightly, if I'm going to say this, we didn't get onto this long enough with Tim, but I think there's a big discussion to be had there. I think he underestimates the pull of Russian culture. And I'm not disputing in any way the effectiveness of a lot of things that the US does and has done. But I also think that they're not as good as they were. And, I really do believe that. I mean, compare Star Wars, the Star Wars that came out in the 70s, which I hugely enjoyed as a kid. I remember it at the time. The verve and dynamism and energy of it were these incredibly, I think, over-laden films that we get today. Maybe I'm, expressing my own views here, but anyway, I think that we're seeing, even in that field, it seems to me America is now losing its way.
Pasha Moyer says, what about Dvenatsit Storliv, the 12 Chairs? I liked that one.
Oh, it's a brilliant film.
And the Mel Brooks remake too.
Yeah, and the Russian one is better though, by far. And the book, the original book by Ilfin Petrov, were basically, by the way, one person, not two. It's a pseudonym, but one of the funniest books ever written.
Russell Hall says, Russian cinema is better than modern Star Wars.
Well, depends which Star Wars. I mean, I was a fan of the original Star Wars, but as I said, I find the later ones
modern Star Wars, which is
modern Star Wars. Well, I mean, to me, as I said, I have to say that they've become well, bloated and creaky. And I don't think I'm the only person who thinks that. And I'm not going to even start on some of the ideological issues, which are contaminating everything, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Mr. Wonderful says Solaris inspired a generation of sci-fi movies.
It's an extraordinary film, actually. Very complicated, difficult film, but really very, very amazing film. Yes.
OMG Puppy says Abby Fine Reader is first-rate software from Russia.
Yeah.
Keir Brown says the Taliban, they said the West touted themselves as the good in the Star Wars films, but they, the Americans, were more like the Empire and Taliban, the rebels.
Well, is that what the Taliban say? I didn't know. I can't really see that the Taliban have much connection with Luke Skywalker, to be honest, but there we go. I don't really see these similarities, but, about the Empire, well, you want to look at the globalists and you want to look at some of the people who were involved in Russiagate, well, yeah, I could see that there are some similarities.
Mark Hamill doesn't have any similarities to Luke Skywalker anymore.
No, he does. That's true enough. Very true.
Odd. Yeah, he's now the drone ambassador for Zelensky. Yeah. So, anyway, Rhodesian Dream says "To the Lake" was a great Russian miniseries on Netflix.
I've never seen it. That's one I don't know.
Let's see here. Tim, hubby, and I love Russian movies. We feel the production is better.
Well, this is a big topic we're going to discuss, I think, Russian cinema at some point, when we finally are able to have the space and the time to do these things. We've often talked about doing more cultural programs.
Jeanette says, I'd like to hear more about Tim helping people from the West to move to Russia. Actually, Tim answered that in the live stream.
Yeah.
That's one of the questions that he went into in depth. Yuri Gabor says, no hits in Transcarpathia, even though Slovakia is sending self-propelled artillery units. Is there any strategic target in the area worth to hit, or Russia avoids delays to attack close to Hungary?
I don't know, and I'm not able to answer those questions. I will say one other thing, that there are, if you're talking about that part of Ukraine, Transcarpathia, there are people there. It's one area of Western Ukraine where there are pro-Russian sentiments. So there may be a decision also, political decision, not to strike there. But I can't answer that question. I don't have that kind of information.
Yeah. Sparky says, don't know about now, but weren't there some good Russian movies around World War II? Seems like they were in the top 5 movie industry countries. Yeah, lots.
There are some brilliant Russian war films. I mean, come and see. Soviet war film, I should say, but I mean that was, in my opinion, one of the greatest. Ballad of a Soldier. I mean, lots of them. Cranes are flying. The Russians make exceptional war films, really outstanding ones.
Peter Subletis says, loving this. Thank you, Peter. Deidre, thank you for that super sticker. Osman the Yunan, thank you for that super sticker. Mark Andrezak says the video Ukrainian neo-NAZI Jordan from Azov showed footage of the massacre of the civilian population of Kupiansk. How do we know who is who?
We don't. And I've just said this many times. I personally, and I'm going to say this straight away, I have no doubt in my own mind about what is happening and who is responsible. And I don't think you need to guess too far what it is. But all of these allegations should be properly investigated, and they never will be. And that is a disaster. That's an absolute disaster, because real crimes are being committed and perpetrators are able to go free, because the process of investigation is now so politicized and so corrupted that it is impossible now ever to get to the final truth of these stories and to get that truth accepted.
Toilet Sauce says, I get the feeling Tim hangs out with the wrong people. The inferiority complex stereotype is way overstated. What is holding back small business is bureaucracy, not confidence.
I've heard exactly that point made to me by small business people outside Moscow. I've been to provincial Russian cities and they made exactly that point. They say corruption not an issue. That hardly exists. And it is bureaucracy, not so much that there's too much of it, but rather that the Russian bureaucracy, the local bureaucracy especially, simply doesn't understand what businessmen need, business people need, and is simply not adaptable to their needs. And that is one undoubted major factor. As for lack of self-esteem and pride in being Russian, I'm going to say something else. Again, I've travelled outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the phenomena that Tim is talking about seem to me to be overwhelmingly characteristic of those two big cities. If you go to Russian provincial cities, and I've also been to Russian regional universities, you'll find the academic staff and the students there have a completely different attitude to the one that Tim describes.
Lakeva, thank you for that super sticker. Paul, thank you for that super chat. Jetset.1 says, can you exchange CHF Swiss franc in Russia at a good rate?
You know, that's the thing Tim knows, I don't.
Yeah, we don't know. SSSSS says, I agree, Tim has inferiority complex. I visit Russia and people are not like crazy about Hollywood.
I think that's also. I think that's basically true, in the sense that I think they were a lot more keen on Hollywood 10, 20 years ago than they are now, and I think they are turning against it. But then I'm turning against it as well, having once been a huge admirer, because I mean the films that it's churning out now, I mean, are frankly not of the sort that appeal to me. I mean, I can't put it more simply than that.
Commander Crossfire says, and I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him.
The pale horse. Wow. Yeah. You are an
Apocalypse.
Apocalypse, yeah.
And Johnny Cash, by the way.
No, Johnny Cash.
Paul, thank you for that super chat. Fuzzy Izad says, here in Czech, the news now saying that China is furious with Russia. Do you have any news for that? I checked out to try and find some evidence that that was the case. I know that the Czech media was saying that. I have found no evidence, not a scintilla of evidence of that anywhere. No part of the Chinese media is saying this. No Chinese official is hinting at this. The Chinese are very angry with the US for all sorts of reasons. I've seen no sign that they're angry with Russia. From James, thank you for that super chat. Elza says, when I stayed for a year in Russia, I was asked the same. Why?
I know. I've come across that myself. Why? Why this animus towards them? And it's a very good question. And you know, I can't give a simple answer to it.
Sparky says, Dad had an incredible doctor. She was American, but went to medical school in Russia. She could diagnose obscure issues accurately at a glance before hooking up any high-tech machines.
Yeah, we've all experienced this. I mean, I've come across people, Russian people, experts, professionals, who are extraordinarily skilled at what they do.
Toilet Sauce says, about his point about Russia not producing movies like Star Wars, who cares? I have never watched Star Wars and I'm not going to.
Well, I come back to what I've said previously. When America did things like Star Wars, well, it did them brilliantly. And, you know, maybe it's not the most intellectually heavy film, but not every film needs to be intellectual and heavy. There's a lot to be said for good entertainment, and that was a wonderful entertainment. They don't make things like that anymore. I mean, that's all I'm going to say. I mean, they just don't.
Bongo Cat, thank you for that super chat. Pavlos Papayorio says, you guys should invite Jacques Baud, Swiss commentator with views similar to yours. He did an interview in English with the Grey Zone on the 27th of September. You can find his French commentary on Ligne Droite or Max Lino editions.
No, it's a very good idea, and I'm a great fan of Jacques Baud. I think we all are, yeah.
Vas Comprende says, thank you for your work. What about a live about Armenia situation?
Yeah, we should
You
do one.
know Gevork Almasian of Syriana Analysis Channel, specialist of Syria and Armenia.
I do know him indeed, and I think we should definitely be somebody definitely to look out for. But yes, and we should certainly do one on Armenia.
And from Lado Moreau says, I still prefer to listen to Earl Grey about life of a foreigner in Russia. Tim Kirby didn't give me the impression he understands Russians or Russian culture.
Well, if I may say so, it's always useful to hear more than one person about things. And remember, they are in different places. They have different life experiences. You need to listen to lots of people to form a complete view.
And on that note, we will end this Q&A session.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.